Hey, good morning. We're
Good
here
morning.
on February the 19th, 2015 at the JCC for the purpose of doing a video interview with Ian Levine for the Roots to Boots project, documenting the immigration of South African Jews to the city of Dallas. So my first question to you, Ian, is I would like you to give us kind of an overall view of the immigration of your ancestors, you know, your grandparents or great-grandparents, wherever it starts, from the European continent or Russia or wherever they came from, into the South African or African continent, wherever they settled, what you can tell us about their story and their journey.
Okay, I don't have a long history of my great-grandparents because I didn't even have basically any grandparents growing up. They all passed on when I was either not born yet, or I had one grandfather that died when I was about 6, but he lived in a different city, so I never really got to see him or got to know him very well.
Do you know where he came from?
So he came originally, that was my grandfather, my mother's father. He came from, I believe, Lithuania.
Mm-hmm.
That was my mother's father. My mother's mother was born in Belgium, in a little city called Antwerp, and the family fled from there to England, and from England they went down to South Africa. My father's parents, I don't know exactly, I would say also Lithuania or Russia, but I don't have a lot of information on them. They both were passed when before I was born.
Do you know what they did for a living when they came to Africa?
Unfortunately, my father's mother, which would be my grandmother, was a handicapped person.
Mm-hmm.
She had 6 children, and by the time the 6th one came along, she became a paraplegic. And the father left at that time. My grandfather left, so he was not at all in the picture at all. He left my father, I believe, I don't know the story well, but he left my father when he was probably in his teens.
I see.
So my father never really spoke about his father, and he also never really spoke very much about his mother, because they had passed long before even my father got married. So there was no grandparents on that side. And then, as I say, my mother's father was alive, but he lived in Cape Town, and we lived in Johannesburg. So he died when I was about 5 or 6. So maybe I'd seen him on vacations that I could remember 3 or 4 times.
Do you know what he did for a living in Cape Town?
He was a kind of like a traveling salesperson.
Mm-hmm.
However, he didn't drive, so he had to have someone to drive for him.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't really know what he did. And they used to live in a little town called Muizenberg,
Mm-hmm.
South Africa, in Cape Town.
Mm-hmm.
It was a seaside suburb, quite far out of the center of Cape Town. And it was a seaside village where a lot of Jews felt comfortable going to, ones that came from Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And so my mom was brought up in Muizenberg.
And what was her childhood like?
She had a wonderful childhood. Everything centered around beach and weather and friends, and she always speaks about how they would go to the beach in the morning and swim before they went to school, and just a wonderful lifestyle that they had there.
Did she go to a Jewish school?
No, there was no Jewish day
No
school.
Jewish day
No,
school.
not at that time. And there maybe was in the city of Cape Town, but she was quite a long way.
So how did it come about that your parents met?
My mother left Cape Town in her early 20s and went to Johannesburg, and I think was given, my father and her were given each other's, given an introduction to each other or something like that, and that's how they got together, by an introduction. Not a
Wasn't a shidduch.
Not a shidduch, no. It was just maybe friends. One person knew someone else, or they might have met at a particular place and started talking. So
What was your mother doing?
my mother can tell you that because she's going to be talking to you
Yes,
after me.
yes, but you need to tell me what you know first.
Okay.
So what do you know about what your mother was doing at the time that she met your
My
father?
mother was working as a secretary in a I believe like a legal firm, and I don't really know much about that part of what she did at that time.
And what was your father doing?
My father was I don't really know exactly what he did, but he was in sales of either glass or timber. And that's kind of what he did his whole working career. He was in sales of timber. He would sell wood to furniture manufacturers. That's what he did for a living.
So they married in Johannesburg?
Married in Johannesburg, had 4 children. My father, by the way, was one of the top tennis players in South Africa.
Oh, really?
Maybe one of the top, for sure, Jewish tennis players at the time, because it wasn't really a sport that was really played very much at that time on the level that he played by Jewish people. So he was probably one of the best, at his peak, probably one of the best Jewish tennis players in South Africa.
How did he become interested in tennis?
I don't know. There was no sport at all in his family. As I said, his father left them. There was very little sport. He told me one time that he used to live near to a tennis club, and he asked someone to play with him, and that person said, "You don't know how to play, so I'm not going to play with you." And that motivated him to start playing, and used to spend hours and hours hitting against a wall until he perfected his game, until he started getting better, and then he improved his game and eventually got to be one of the top players.
So was there a tennis club then that he belonged to at that time?
It was at the time that he was learning. I'm not sure if he had enough money to join the club, or if they let him just come there because that's how it was. I don't think that you had to be a member of the club. Later on, when I was around, he was playing league tennis for the tennis club that he used to belong to.
Did he teach you to play tennis?
Yes. Yes, I was never as good as him though. I had aspirations, but I didn't have the motivation, self-motivation. He had the motivation for me, but I never had the motivation. And enough. I'm very good, but not good enough to be to play professionally or anything like that.
So tell me about your family life, your siblings, and what it was like.
I have an older sister. She lives in Tulsa, Oklahoma now. She has 3 children and 2 grandchildren. I have a younger brother that lives here in Dallas. He's divorced from his wife. They have 4 children. And I have another brother that also lives in Tulsa. He was never married.
And what was life like for you living in Johannesburg as a child?
Well, I should tell you 2 things. When I was about 12 years old, my family moved to Cape Town. My father's brother had a business there, and he asked my father to join him. And we moved to Cape Town when I was 12 years old. And we lived there until I went to the army in South Africa when I was 17. In South Africa, you could, when you finished high school, you had to automatically go into the South African Defence Force, or you could go to university. At that time, I decided that I was going to go to get my defence training out of the way. So I went, when I was 17, I left Cape Town to go and do my military training, which was 1 year at the time. And at that time, my parents moved back to Johannesburg.
So while you were living in Cape Town, what type of school did you go to?
I went to a regular public school, all right through high school, right through school, from beginning to end. I always went to public school.
Did you have any religious training on the side?
I only went to what was called Cheder, which was going certain afternoons, or at one time when I was very young, we used to go before school started. So school started at 8 a.m. We had to be there at 7 a.m. and we would have 2 or 3 times a week, we would have our Cheder lessons, which was basically to teach us how to read and write in Hebrew.
Was it in preparation for Bar Mitzvah?
Yes.
It was.
Yes. And as I got older and as it got to the time to learn my Bar Mitzvah, I had gone through different levels of Cheder, different classes. When we moved to Cape Town, that was a year before my Bar Mitzvah, and I had to continue with Cheder as well as take lessons with the cantor at our synagogue.
Was there, was the family Zionistic at all?
No, I would not say that.
So you did
No.
not belong to Zionist youth movements?
No, a little bit. We had something in South Africa called, it was called Habonim,
Habonim.
and I wasn't very proactive. I did do it a little bit. I went to 1 or 2 weekend camps which were near to home, but I was never very active or very involved in it. Never went to long sleepaway camps or anything like that.
So tell me about your Army experience. What was that like?
Army experience was, in retrospect, when I look back, it was a great year. I wasn't excited to do it. There was not really a purpose to do it. At that time, South Africa didn't really need an army. We were not fighting any wars. There was no thought of anybody attacking us. But they had the defense force, and everybody had to do it at some point. So I went in there knowing that I would have to do it and do the best that I could while I was there. I had an interesting opportunity that I was chosen to do a specific course, which was I was drafted into the artillery, and they sent me on a course which is called Artillery Intelligence, and that was not because I was intelligent. It was just not specifically intelligent, but that was what they called it, Artillery Intelligence, which was a course on how to, with certain information like weather and sound and different things like that, you could put the information on a map, and all the grids and all the directions of what you heard and all the information, and by that you could pinpoint where the enemy was shooting from, and so you could tell your artillery where the grids were to shoot.
Oh,
and so I was picked to go on that course, which was away from the base where I was at, and it was about a 2 or 3 month course. I learned to do signals, I learned to map on maps, I learned to type. At that time, no one really used to type, not like they do today on computers, but at that time I learned how to type without having to look down to see what I was doing, all fingers, a proper typing course. So I enjoyed it. It was fun. For the rest of my army training, the rest of that year, I was in a city called Potchefstroom. It was about 150 miles out of Johannesburg, where my base was. I had a very enjoyable time. There were a lot of Jewish kids with me, and it was for the most part good. I got out pretty much every weekend. I could go back to Johannesburg and visit with my family and my friends there. I still had friends from when I was a kid, and we used to live there. I still had the same friends, so it was like going home to be with my friends, and it was great. Only one bad situation. I don't want to call it bad, but when you come to the end of your training, you're very much looking forward to the last day of December when you're going to be let out. And in November, they called me in and told me that I'm having to go on a trip. And I didn't know what that meant or where they were taking me, but I did know that a lot of troops were forming in a state north of South Africa called Southwest Africa. It's now called Namibia. So they sent me off by train to, at the time, Southwest Africa, to a city called Windhoek, and then from Windhoek they took us up to the border, which bordered onto Angola. But I didn't know that I'd be going into Angola until I was actually there. And the reason why I went to Angola is because Angola was a Portuguese colony, and the people that the population were uprising against the Portuguese government that was there, and it was being defended by the communists, and the communists wanted to take it over, which they had done in other countries in Africa. So the South Africans, as well as the Americans, or with the help of the Americans, decided that they were going to try and defend the land and not let it become a communist country right on the doorstep of South Africa. So I went in there with my group of it was like an army invasion of South Africa into Angola. And I was sent up there to do what I'd learned to do in the army, which was tell our guns where we needed to shoot at. And so it was about a 2.5-month experience. So I never got out of the army at the end of December like I thought I would. And I got out about the middle of February the following year. And so that was the only really bad thing. I never really saw any action because I was behind the fighting lines. I wasn't an infantryman or anything like that, so I never saw any battle, I never saw any death, or I never had to shoot at anybody. So,
but you put your training to good use.
We did put our training to good use, yes.
Yeah. Wow.
So at the time I thought it was terrible and that I may die, but in war, but in retrospect it was nothing. And we left after about, like I say, in February. The understanding was that the Americans were not coming to help us like they said they were, so South Africa left, and eventually the communist-backed people took over the country.
So when you left the army, did you go on to university after that?
Well,
what did you do?
interestingly enough, I was not a great student. When I finished high school, I had already been working for an uncle of mine that had a restaurant on weekends, and I really loved that business. And I had a vision that I wanted to be in my own business, and I felt that I could do it. And so in South Africa, going to college was not as prevalent as what it is today. I have a kid now that's in college. And it was no question of whether he was going to go or not, because here in America, every kid, for the most part, goes to college. In South Africa, I have to say, I don't know if it was our education, I don't know if it was our upbringing, I don't know if it had to do with Judaism, I don't know what it was, but I wasn't highly educated, but I was smart enough to find my way into working in a restaurant. I worked for 3 months in a restaurant when I came out of the army. My father had gone to eat at this particular restaurant, and he told the owner of the restaurant that his son was coming out of the army and had been working for about 5 years in a restaurant in Cape Town and was looking for a job as a manager. And he said, well, tell him to come and see me when he arrives here. So I went there when I came out of the army. I had an interview with them. They immediately gave me a job as an assistant manager in the restaurant, and I worked there for 3 months. And I found I didn't enjoy the work as much as I thought I would enjoy it. The hours were long. It was weekends. I was starting to think that maybe this is not for me, even after thinking that I had this dream that I would own my own restaurant one day. Anyway, so I decided after 3 months to leave that position, and I went and I decided that maybe I need to get something more substantial, something that I could learn or do something. And at the time, we had a store in South Africa, a very famous store called Woolworths.
Yes.
It had nothing to do with the Woolworths in the United States. It was kind of
more like a department store, wasn't it?
It was a department store, more like, I would say, kind of like, in a way, like Nordstrom's, except they sold food.
Right.
And they had a training management course that you could go on for a year. And if you were able to be accepted into that company and do their training course, it was something that could stand you in very good stead, either to work for them, or there were other companies that were supermarkets and things like that. And if you had training, if you had Woolworths training, you were on another level. And I thought, it's a year's course, I'll try it. I did that for about a year. And when it came to the end of that year, the people that I worked for in the restaurant for 3 months called and made me an offer they wanted to expand their business, but they didn't have people to run the restaurants, and they offered me to become a equal partner in the business. So I went back into that business, working and running that particular branch of the restaurant by myself with no help, and I was obviously sharing in the profits and running the business solely on my own. At the time, I was about 20 years old, and I was running the restaurant. It was reasonably successful, and about, I want to say, 18 months into that situation, I decided that I wanted to either buy my partners out or we sell the restaurant, because once again I was at a point where social life was non-existent. I was working 12 to 18 hours a day, no rest, no help from my partners. They were running their businesses. I felt that at 22 years old, this was not a way to go forward. I was not having any social life at all, zero. So we got together, we decided that I would take over the business. I felt that if I was doing it for myself, maybe I could hire a manager and have some more time off. And that's what I did. I had it for about another 18 months, so in total I had it for just over 3 years. I sold it for, at that time I thought it was a lot of money, and I got out of the business. It was a dream that I'd accomplished. I was very happy to have done it. At the time, at 23 years old, I sold the business and really didn't need to work for, at the time, I had a payment. I sold the business, and the guy that bought the business was going to pay me over 5 years. So I felt like I didn't really have to work for 5 years if I didn't want to, because at the time I had enough money. So I traveled around the world for about a year, and I went to Europe, I went to America. I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do. At that time, there was already people starting to leave South Africa, a lot of talk about moving to different countries, that politics was not going to be good, that people were starting to lay seeds and to think about leaving at that time. So I went all around Europe, and I went to America. I had one of my best friends that already moved to America with his family, and I went to stay with them for a couple of months.
Where were they living?
Chicago. So I had already, at 23, been in America, and my very first experience of coming to America was a beautiful experience. We had no patriotism in South Africa. There was no such thing as us being excited about being South Africans, or waving our flag, or singing our national anthem, which was in another language. It was in a language called Afrikaans, which is kind of a descendant of Dutch.
Right.
And so we didn't have like a closeness to it. But when I arrived in America and I saw all these flags outside people's homes, and it just seemed something interesting and unbelievable to me. And at that time I said to myself, even if I would come to America and open up a restaurant, I'm sure I could do well here, because there's just so many people here. And so I felt like there was just such a huge population that whatever I did, I could find my way. And I went back to South Africa, and I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do. In the back of my mind, I thought maybe it would be nice to go to America, but I wasn't sure. And so I went back to South Africa after that 1 year of being away, and I spent time with my friends, and I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do. And one of my friends said to me, I work in this jewelry company, and they're looking for a salesman, and would you be interested in interviewing for the job? So I said, well, I don't really know anything about jewelry. And she said, don't worry about it. I think you'd be fine, and I can help you with it. So I went for the interview, and the owner of the company said, have you worked in jewelry before? And I said no. And he said, well, what have you done? I told him I used to own a restaurant, and I've been traveling for a year. And he said, well, I'd like you to start next week. I said, well, how do you know if I can even do this job? I mean, I don't even know what it's about. He said, don't worry. The person that told me, that works here, that told me that you you'll be able to handle the job. I said, okay. Came to work the following week, and my friend, who was a sales rep for the company, took me with her everywhere she went on all her calls, and a month later I was on my own, traveling around South Africa and going to see the customers, and I learned to sell jewelry.
Was this precious stones?
This is diamonds and gold jewelry. So I learned the business. I did that for about 4 or 5 years, and at that point I was about 28 or 29. I had gotten married to a girl that I'd met when I'd come back to South Africa after my overseas trip, and I was really telling her that I'm thinking of going to live in America. And long story short, we were married for a year, and I decided that it was not a good marriage and I wanted out of it. And shortly after that I left to come to America. But I came to America not knowing for sure that I was going to live here. I didn't immigrate here. I just came to visit. I brought product with me from South Africa. It was in 1985, beginning of 86, and I came to test out the waters to see what's going to happen. I didn't know for sure whether it was all going to work.
So you came with goods to sell?
Came with goods to sell for the guy that I was working for in South Africa, plus a friend of mine owned a diamond cutting factory, and he sent diamonds to me to try and sell over here for him. And after being here for about 3 months, I realized it was going to be a really tough challenge, because in 1986 was the year that America imposed sanctions on South Africa. So in order to take orders and to have them manufactured in South Africa and then shipped here was going to become a challenge. So after 3 months, I realized it's not going to work, and I decided, well, maybe I need to go back home. And a South African friend of mine, not really a friend, but a friend of a friend, he was a little bit older than me. He was probably 10 or 15 years older than me. Had already been in Dallas for about 10 or 15 years, had a jewelry business.
Can you tell us who that was?
His name is David Strelitz and Lawrence Cohn. They had a business, and David Strelitz knew that I had experience in jewelry, and he said to me, called me up and he asked me, would I consider taking a job? And I said, well, what job have you got to offer? He said, well, we have a retail store in Fort Worth, and I need help there. I need some assistance. I said, okay. I said, but I'm going to need some help with sponsorship, because I cannot stay in America indefinitely without someone sponsoring me to be here. And he said, well, I'll do that for you, no problem. So I worked with him for a year, traveling from Dallas to Fort Worth. I didn't want to go live in Fort Worth. All my friends were here. I had a brother living here, had come to America as well. He was here living with me and working in Dallas. And so I was traveling every day to Fort Worth. Didn't enjoy it very much. Didn't enjoy the traveling. Didn't mind the work. Was not excited about it. But I was doing it because I figured maybe this gentleman is going to help me to get my papers, and then I could live legally in America. So after a year, I went to him and I said, I'm really not enjoying this. I don't enjoy the traveling. I've got no intention of moving to Fort Worth. Would you consider, if I left you, to continue to do my sponsorship, but I'll just work for myself? And he said, absolutely, I'll be willing to do that for you. And so I started my own company at that point. With very little money, the money that I'd saved working for him, I started my own diamond wholesale company. And that was 30 years ago.
Wow.
And today I have been blessed with a solid business. Been doing the same thing. I've owned the company for 30 years, and we're still in business, and we sell nationally to retail jewelry stores all across the nation.
What's the name of the company?
The company is called Spectrum Diamonds. And we have a brand which is called Sylvie Collection, and Sylvie is my wife, and she runs the business with me.
And you met Sylvie here?
That's another long story. I was on a buying trip in Israel. I don't know if you know that Israel's a big diamond cutting center.
I do know that. I know a lot about Israel.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yes.
So I was on a business trip to Israel one time to buy diamonds, And a South African that I knew from South Africa, I met him at the hotel where I was staying at. And we were chatting, and the next day was Shabbat, and we were sitting at the pool, and my South African friend, by the way, was living in Antwerp. I don't know if I said that already.
Yeah.
And he came and he sat with my friend and I, another South African diamond dealer from Dallas. And we were chatting, and this young lady walks by, and my friend says, "I'd like you to meet my two South African friends," which was myself and my other friend. And we started talking to her, one thing led to another, and we were chatting about that we're in the diamond business, and she told me that she was in the diamond business in Antwerp, and that's how she knew the South African friend of mine. And we were chatting on and off, and then I said to her, "You should come to Dallas and have a look at it and see what it's like." I liked her, so I was quite open, and she said, "Well, I don't think I'll ever be coming to Dallas because I have no interest in going to America." And we chatted, and I'm going to cut the story short, but we exchanged information, and I said, "If ever I come to Antwerp, I'll look you up." And I went to Antwerp, and I did a business trip, and we did talk to each other over that time for about a year, long distance. And eventually I went to visit Antwerp, and I visited her, and we got interested in each other, and then she came to Dallas for a few months, and shortly after that we got engaged to be married.
And so how long have you been married?
We've been married 20 years.
And you have how many children?
We have two young children.
Two.
One son, 18. He's now at University of Texas in Austin. He went through Jewish Day School here in Dallas.
What school did he go to?
He went to Levine Academy and then to Yavna. And I have a 17-year-old that's still at Yavna. He's got a year to go. And he also went through Levine Academy and Yavna.
And what are your children's names?
Gary is the oldest, Gary Levine, and Steve is the younger one.
Very nice, very nice. So you and your wife are in business together?
Yes, we're in business together.
So
a lot of people think it's a big challenge, but I feel very blessed to have an amazing partner.
Well, she knows the business, so
she understands the business. She's exceptional in what she does in all aspects of our business, and I'm happy to have her with me.
You're very blessed. You are very
Yes.
blessed. So you've been away from South Africa for a long time at this point.
I've been away 30 years.
Is there anything that you miss about
You
South
know,
Africa?
In the first year, I was thinking maybe I should go back. It's going to be too tough to stay here. Coming here with no immigration papers, didn't have much money. At the time that I came to visit, you couldn't really take much money out of South Africa. You could take the equivalent of $5,000, which was at the time what we call it. The currency in South Africa was rands. So I was allowed to take out the 10,000 rand, which was about $5,000. So after you bought a car and you get an apartment and you start doing stuff, money goes very quickly. And I didn't know whether I would be able to sustain myself. But obviously when I got the job, it made things easier. And it was a grand plan to stay here because going back to South Africa, now we had the sanctions and things were getting worse and white people were leaving there and they didn't know if there was a future, and it was not, I was not excited to go back, but I thought that maybe I wouldn't have any options. But luckily enough, everything worked itself out and I was happy to stay here. But so it was only in that first year that I started thinking maybe I should go back. But it's not like I had something to miss in South Africa. Yes, I had my family there and I had friends there, but I didn't believe there was a future, so I didn't let that worry me. And I really got entrenched into Dallas life, and there were a lot of South Africans here, and it was easy for me. It was like living in Johannesburg.
So when you came here, did you start to your social life mostly with the South Africans?
All South Africans.
All South Africans.
All South Africans. I did meet some American girls, but didn't find anybody at that point that I really felt like I wanted to have a relationship with, a long-term marriage situation. And so I would say 99% of my friends were South African.
And what about this point in your life? Is your social life revolving around South African couples?
Yes. Yes, mainly couples.
Mostly.
Mainly couples my age.
And mostly South African.
All South Africans.
All South African. So
It was easier. It was much easier to. It was, like I said, it was like being at home. So that's why I'm saying it was very easy. I didn't think I needed to go back because I was lonely or didn't have friends or anything. It was just like being back in South Africa. I had my golfing friends, I had my tennis friends, I had my poker friends, all my friends would invite me to dinners. We'd go to restaurants together, dinners at their house. It was very easy for me.
Have you become involved at all in the Jewish community in general? I mean, I know you said your children have gone to the day schools, but other than that, no affiliation.
We're part of the JCC, but I never got involved in. I spent a lot of time with my kids and their sports, and we were very interested in boating, so we used to spend a lot of our weekends out boating on the lake, and so it didn't really, and plus I had the business that was taking up a lot of my time. I didn't really feel like I wanted to spend my spare time in Jewish organizations and helping and things like that. So other than the shul that I went to, and
which show was that?
The Chabad of Dallas.
Uh-huh.
Other than that, I didn't really get involved in any Jewish things.
What might I have forgotten to ask you that you think would be important for us to know about you and your family?
I brought my parents here to America. You're going to interview my mom shortly.
Yes, I am.
My father passed away last year at 94. He had Alzheimer's. When my dad was 75, he wanted to leave South Africa. That was around about in the early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And he couldn't work. Obviously, he had retired, but he wanted to be he wanted to come and be with his two sons at the time in Dallas or in America. And so we facilitated that and brought them here. And they lived here until now. My mom's still here.
Mm-hmm.
She lives in a retirement community.
Which one?
It's called Town Village.
Yes, I'm familiar with that.
And she comes every day to the J.
Mm-hmm.
She's very involved in the J. She comes to the senior facility that you have, and she comes, I think she comes 4 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very happy here. I think it was a tough adjustment for them, but and subsequent to that, all my other siblings came to America. So we really don't have very much, except for a few cousins. We don't have any family. My mother doesn't have any siblings left. They all passed on. My father has one brother that lives in Australia, or my late father has a brother that lives in Australia. All the rest have passed on. So other than that, I think I told you pretty much everything.
Is there anything specific you'd like to leave in terms of philosophical thoughts in terms of a legacy for your children?
I would just like to tell them that I feel very blessed to have been able to come to America. The life I had in South Africa was great, but unfortunately, politically, South Africa took a bad direction, and I could have had a wonderful life in South Africa had there not been that problem. A lot of South Africans have gone to live in Australia, which was really a very close type of country to South Africa, very English influences and weather. In fact, a lot of people ask me why I didn't go live in Southern California and why did I come to Dallas, because the weather in California is so much like South Africa. I don't know why, but it's another story why I came to Dallas. But I thought I'd come to Dallas for 6 months and check it out, but obviously 30 years later I'm still here. And my wife from Antwerp is very happy living in Dallas, so it looks like we're here for the duration. I was saying I want my kids to feel blessed to have the opportunity to live in freedom, with liberty, with safety. It's the greatest country in the world, opportunity for everybody. I came here, I didn't have any degrees, I didn't have any higher education, university education. I had common sense. I had a tremendous work ethic, and I believe that with that I was able to weave a lifestyle for myself which is beyond anything I could ever have expected. And I hope that they will appreciate the opportunity that they'll have to go forward with the foundations that I laid for them.
Thank you so much. It's been
You're
a
welcome.
real pleasure getting to know you, and we appreciate you taking the time for the Roots to Boots project.
You're welcome.
Have a great day.
Thank you.